We've come off one of the most economically turbulent years in recent history because of I was about to say because of the coronavirus, but understand the true damage to the American economy did not come from the virus. It came from the government's response to the virus. Particularly what we've seen from blue states, the complete shutdowns of the economies there, and also globally, right? I mean, even though you've had a lot of countries, including the US, send out checks to people, guess what? If your factories are shut down, you can print as much money as you want and send it to as many people. If you're not making stuff, there's consequences there. And again, we've had almost a year of debilitated economic production globally. On top of that, and that's when we don't have barges clogging up the Suez Canal, as we saw a couple weeks ago. And that's, the problem is that this creates a crisis. And as Ari Emanuel told during the Obama administration, Democrats are very good at not letting crises go to waste. And so what we should expect is that they're going to use, and we've already started to see it, filling up spending bills now that they have the House and they have the Senate. They don't have to have a 60-vote threshold in the Senate to pass spending bills. The parliamentarian just said that they could use a 50+1 vote multiple times this year. And so again, the amount of stuff that's packed into these spending bills under the cover of COVID relief and other aspects are going to be a lot of dangerous stuff. And for example, the COVID relief spending bill, again, it covered, there were some checks that came out, not quite as much as Democrats were promising while they were running for Senate in Georgia, but there were some direct payments that did go up. But within this were bailouts of blue states, right? States like Florida were doing great. They're bailing out Illinois, New Jersey, New York, California. They're trying to do as much as they can to make sure that they saturate unions, of course, from the core constituencies. Of the Democratic Party, particularly a lot of this government state pension funds against states like Illinois and New Jersey. And so again, they're using the cover of a crisis to pass whatever they want from a spending perspective. Just earlier this week, we have another $2.5 trillion spending bill in the pretext of jobs, right? We've heard this before, stimulus, shovel ready. Of course, not a lot of those jobs from 2009 turned out not being shovel ready, because guess what? When the government spends money, it comes from somewhere. It comes from the productive sector, giving it to the government sector, right? What's also interesting is financing this. They're starting to get creative. Peter Buttigieg, whose entire experience for being Treasury Secretary was proposing to his husband at a train station, has proposed a very interesting idea. To help finance some of this infrastructure, he's proposed what's called a mileage tax. Now, again, we pay taxes every time we go to the gas pump, right? And this is historically the way that we finance roads and things like that. Well, think about the real ramifications. Now, the problem is that we don't spend as much gas. Cars go a lot further now. There's a lot of discrepancies. You have electric vehicles, right? And the mileage gas tax doesn't quite work for electric vehicles. So now they want to track your miles. Now think about this. If the government starts tracking your miles, think about the surveillance implications for that. So again, what they're doing is that you're using fiscal policy to massively expand the scope of government. Again, Joe Biden's talked about using taxes as a means of gun control. Well, again, you don't have to perhaps ban guns outright if you simply make them too expensive for normal people to use. Of course, it will not apply to politicians, celebrities, and the powerful elite that have become the backbone of the Democratic Party, but it will hurt people in this room. It will hurt average Americans. It will hurt minority groups, which they care about every 2 or 4 years. But it will not affect the core interests of the modern-day Democratic Party. So again, this is looking back at 2020, and this is one problem when it comes to fiscal policy. Republicans haven't been great about this either. In 2020, unique time. But if you think about it, 2020 should have been the peak of COVID-related relief, right? That's when you had the peak of government shutdowns, of the economic damage, and yet again we're accelerating with a Biden, Harris, Pelosi, Washington. But see here last year, the actual money that we paid in taxes, made up about half of our spending in 2020. Now think about that. If the money we bring in only makes up half of what we're actually spending, where does the rest of it come from? We're not even getting on the topic of unfunded liabilities. That's a whole talk for another show, but again, worth mentioning, we're hundreds of trillions there. But the answer is that we print it. And this is M1, there's various money supply measures. This one, they all have kind of similar effect. I think I have another one here. Not quite as dramatic, but again, what you see is that even when we're looking at the financial crisis of 2008, that's a blip on the radar compared to what we did this past year. So again, what we're doing is the Fed has gone off the rails. Now, the only reason we don't have inflation and a lot of other problems, a lot of other countries are following this pattern, right? Where Europe's done the same thing, China's done the same thing, Japan, Switzerland, everyone else is doing the same thing. But you understand, this is radical by nature. We've never seen this sort of money printing ever in American history. And again, the ramifications of this, I want to dive into it because again, this is a problem that doesn't get nearly as much attention. We understand tax increases are bad. Again, if you haven't heard, vote no on the property tax increase that comes this month. But money and finance can kind of be a little more difficult, more complex. That's why we need wisdom, as Ford prayed earlier. And this is, I want to dive in again, not only the financial consequences of it, but again, the way that the uncertainty from this aggressive, historic, unprecedented money printing, the ramifications it has for us as Americans beyond simply the economic consequences. Now, first of all, what's important to understand is that the Fed is currently right now advocating for more inflation. And this is devastating. Because guess what? Inflation is the most a regressive tax in existence. Property taxes, very, very bad. Again, income taxes, very, very bad. But there's nothing that directly damages workers more than inflation. It's something we don't see, but when you have a fixed income, particularly seniors on Social Security, right? When the prices of everything skyrockets, it's a way of wealth redistribution. It's a way of taking money out of your pocket. Even worse, it's a tax that directly benefits a few aspects of the economy. Because when money is created, it doesn't, and we print it, it doesn't hit everybody spontaneously, right? It'd be one thing if prices were going up and we were all getting more money, then it kind of balances out, right? No, that's not the way it works. When Washington prints money, it goes to banks, it goes to Wall Street. So if you track how well the financial service industry has done since the 1980s, they've done great. Your average worker paycheck, not quite so much, right? And then it goes to wherever Wall Street invested. Silicon Valley, big tech, been attractive avenues for investment, right? They've been doing great. Workers at auto manufacturing plants, not quite so much, right? The left loves to talk about inequality and income inequality and why is the 1% getting bigger? Why are corporations getting bigger? Well, it's because in this inflationary environment where the Fed takes money, prints it, and gives it to special people, powerful people, merit business plans, having a really good plan for business here in Panama City, that's not what is rewarded. Instead, size is rewarded. Access to Wall Street is rewarded. Access to politicians is rewarded. This is the major wealth drain in America. When Tucker Carlson talks about vulture capitalism, he gets upset at multinational corporations that have abandoned American values and instead cater to China. But the biggest piece he's missing is this aspect, because it's our financial policies are draining American workforce to reward these corporations. There's other aspects to this. In a lot of banking regulation, we've seen the destruction of a lot of small banks. You still got credit unions that are doing great. They have a little bit of different legal aspect. But small banks have become regional banks. Regional banks get absorbed by big banks, right? And historically, it's small banks that are the ones that actually lends to communities like Bay County. It's again, we've created an environment where big banks that don't care about us, they might have a branch here, they don't really care about this community, they're the ones benefiting. Now, one of the problems that bankers are realizing around the world is that when you have low interest rates and when you have inflation, they recognize that they need to control it. And so what you're seeing is the trend around the world of eliminating cash and instead trying to create digital currencies. China, this past week, I think they've now fully unleashed their digital yuan. It's really kind of dangerous there. In China, they're talking about having your digital currency expire after a certain point to try to force you to spend it. Again, think about the consequences of a financial policy designed to disincentivize you from saving, right? Again, this has been talked about for years now. They've been talking about it in the open. There's been books written about this, and they try to they act as if this is a boring subject, as if this is, this is just a minor tool belt. No one should care about this. But again, your biggest check against the Fed, against one of the ways historically, right? If you're concerned about your bank, what do? You withdraw your money from the bank in terms of cash, and you store it in your mattress or something like that. Cash has been a check for normal people against the banking system. And that is why they want to destroy it. That's why they want everything digital. Now this is one of the architects of this is a guy named Marvin Goodfriend. He actually passed away a couple years ago, but his legacy still remains. He wrote a paper here that looks perfectly boring, right? The case for unencumbered interest rate policy at the zero bound. Sounds like a really exciting paper, right? I know all of you really want to read that. But see, again, this is what they do. They hide it boring. They hide very scary ideas in boring language. Because what Mr. Goodfriend here suggested was that he identified that the same way that it was important for central banks to kind of get off the gold standard back in the day, he said that it's important to get rid of cash because not only does cash make it easier for the central banks to have power, they do one thing really well. Since 2008, if you have tried to put your money in the bank for savings, right, you've had like very low interest rates. And some things are great. We have John Shook over here, he's a realtor. Low interest rates, great for buying houses, right? Think about negative interest rates. Negative interest rates are when they tax you for not spending your money, kind of similar to the China project. And this might seem like a crazy idea. Banks are going to charge you for not spending. But we've already seen it play out. This is what happened in Europe. No, Sam. We've seen it play in Europe, and Japan, and Switzerland, things like that. And so he recognized that in order to do this, we have to remove cash entirely. So his idea was that, well, it's simple. Since we can't ban cash outright, people might not like that. We're going to detach the value of your cash to your bank. So if you deposit $100, $95 shows up in your bank account. It's beautifully evil in its own right. So that's why and to be fair, and this is kind of scary, Donald Trump actually nominated him to be the Fed. Now, I don't blame Donald Trump. I think he had a few really bad people around him. I wasn't a big fan of his Treasury Secretary. I don't think Trump really understood exactly what this guy did. But this is literally one of the most evil Federal Reserve nominees of all time. And his ideas still exist. He might not be around, but the ideas still exist. Actually, I personally worked with Mike Lee's office to help kill this nomination, so I was very happy about that. But again, we've seen negative interest rates play out elsewhere. Right? We've seen it in Europe, we've seen it in Japan, and Sweden. And again, the results in all these places, they take out your cash, they put it in another mattress, other places. The other aspect of this is that when your money is digital, it's easier to track. And here's the problem. We're seeing the banking system of the United States weaponized against conservatives. Now, this has been kind of trending for a while. The United States has gotten really good at using financial power as a weapon. It started off, as many things do, the war on terror, for example. This became one of our go-to moves, sometimes for good reasons, right? Sanction a really bad Iranian general, okay, that makes sense. But what's dangerous is that then it started debanking conservative activists, like Laura Loomer. I think Laura Loomer was cleared out of her banking account, cleared off of Patreon, and there are other ways to use the financial system, taken off. After the riots on the rally and the events on January 6th, Bank of America used their surveillance tools to track down conservatives that were simply in Washington, D.C. Think about that. They've also, kind of going back to the issue with guns earlier, they started deplatforming gun manufacturers. And so again, we have seen the Biden administration, Nancy Pelosi, the Democrats in Congress are trying to weaponize the FBI. They're trying to create tribunals tracking down the domestic terrorism of Trump's America, all of that. Again, here's a very clear tool, the financial system. And the reason I wanted to bring this up this month is because obviously we've had a lot of discussion about vaccine passports and the way that if you require some sort of digital federal vaccine passport, all the ways that it can be used to track you, can be used to create different classes of citizens, all the harmful ways that this can affect your day-to-day life. It's important to understand these currently exist with our financial system. No changes need to be made. We're already seeing it happen. This week was also the 88th anniversary of kind of an interesting moment. We see during the Great Depression, right? FDR's election was interesting. If you actually look at the 1932 Democratic platform, it's very fascinating. In it, the Democrats talk about how they're going to stop the spending policies of the Hoover administration. They're going to preserve sound money. You read it, it sounds like a Trump platform. I mean, it's great. Of course, then FDR gets in power, ignores all of it, starts signing executive orders. And so one of those, in the aftermath of his election, he signed an executive order confiscating gold from every American. Now, gold's a shiny rock, it's pretty, but why does this matter? Because again, gold was, like cash, a check on politicized money. It was illegal to own gold as an American for decades. It wasn't until actually Gerald Ford signed his own executive order reversing FDR's policies. But there's nothing that a government fears more than people that have the ability to transact financially outside of its control. This is something the communists understood this quite well. But again, we've always seen the money system weaponized. FDR, this is when, again, back in the day, again, your dollar was used to be backed by gold. And of course, the consequence of this has made it very easy to spend, right? And so here, this red thing here, this is what kind of works out. The rest is state spending and other localized spending. But it's the red stuff, right? And this used to be what federal spending was, and it was pretty flat. This was World War I, FDR, and spending never got back. Basically, gold was a brake on federal spending. Kind of the last sort of check. Foreign countries started to get worried, right? Because after FDR, you had the Great Society programs of Lyndon B. Johnson. You had the Vietnam War. You had Korea earlier than that. A lot of spending on both foreign policy, domestic policy. And so, of course, the response to that was from Richard Nixon. Because at the time, while Americans couldn't own gold, foreign countries could exchange their dollars for gold if they were ever concerned about Americans abusing it. Well, guess what? Our government abused it. And the response was, hey, sorry, we're not going to pay in the gold. And it's interesting. If you listen to like a Federal Reserve chairman now, they'll tell you, America's never defaulted on our debt and never will. Well, guess what? That's a default, right? You owe something, and they pay it back with something less valuable. That's a default. There's some other defaults throughout history, but that's a big one not that long ago. Jerome Powell was alive when this happened. So, we've seen. So like, for example, in 2008, I showed you earlier, there was a lot of printing going on in 2008. This was our response. This is why gold kind of skyrocketed there. There was a lot of fear about inflation. But inflation, to be fair, inflation didn't really happen. And I think it's important to talk about this because, again, if I'm worried about the dollar and everything that's going on now, it's a responsible question to ask, okay, well, all you people were worrying about this back in 2008 and it never happened. Well, one thing that was very interesting that happened in 2008, the Fed started paying banks not to lend out money. It's called excess reserves, or interest paid on excess reserves. So you're seeing, and there's a lot of charts in this one, that's kind of what happens when you get an econ talk. But so historically, this is what banks used to hold in excess. Nothing. 2008, boom, skyrocketing, right? And again, it was because the federal government took money that would otherwise go to the Treasury, paying off our debt, and they started paying Wall Street banks not to lend newly created dollars to businesses that needed loans. This was part of the 08 policy. The reason why they did this is because they were trying to prevent inflation. Okay, fine. But again, you had a lot of businesses, a lot of people that needed capital, had to go through outside our financial policy was to pay these banks not to lend to Americans. The difference is that with all the money printed out last year, we're not paying banks not to lend it. We're giving it out. We're sending checks to people. We're bailing out. We're doing PPP loans, giving monies to businesses so they don't lay off employees. I'm not trying to make light of obviously, there's a lot of jobs that were saved from that, a lot of businesses that needed that relief, and that's what happens when the government makes it illegal to your job. I understand all of that, but just understand the consequence of what is happening now is very different than what it was in 2008. We're giving money out. And again, after printing so much more than 2008. So again, this is a lot of doom and gloom and scary stuff. And if you're nervous and you're angry, good. That should be the reaction. That's the proper, healthy response to seeing what this federal government and the Federal Reserve are doing to us. But I don't want to simply make you mad. I want to identify ways that we can respond to it, protect ourselves. Because again, and I think this is something that we can think of at a local, county level, a state level, obviously an individual level, family level. Because when you recognize the headwinds that we're facing, when you recognize how dangerous the environment that we're in, then you can react to it. So here you have gold, you have Bitcoin. These are two examples here. One thing that you see historically in an inflationary culture is that the people that have debt are benefit at the expense of people that lent them money. Historically, there was a time where farmers really wanted silver to be used alongside gold. It was a way of kind of helping them deal with farm debts and things like that. I don't know how many of you listen to Dave Ramsey, and he's always kind of, a lot of common sense finance has always said, hey, debt's your problem. And obviously high interest credit cards, that's not exactly good debt right there. And this is absolutely true when we're living in a moral society, but we're not living in a moral society. We're living in a financially hedonistic society. And so just recognize that if you're thinking about buying a house, if you're thinking about making a big purchase, there's dynamics here at debt that are unique. And before I don't know if there's any lawyers in the room, but I must say I'm not a financial advisor. Please consult all those authorities. I'm a guy that writes economic articles. But getting back to these two things, when we think about our savings, when we think about having wealth built up for our family, for a rainy day, for our security, right? There's no greater source of security as an individual than having savings. Because life is unpredictable. It's chaotic. Savings are important, and the problem is that we've spent decades discouraging people from saving. And when you think about it, civilization has always been built on saving. It's planting that tree that your son or your grandson gets to enjoy, right? It's putting off your consumption now for future. Again, this is what they're trying to destroy. So gold historically has played this role. This is why investors often talk about gold as a hedge on inflation. It's also a great hedge on chaos, things like that. But Bitcoin is a unique sort of asset, and I'm going to just talk a little bit about what makes it unique. Again, I'm not encouraging you to buy Bitcoin over gold or anything like that. But I've had a lot of people ask me questions about it in recent months, and so I kind of want to demystify it a little bit. Bitcoin was actually a response to 2008. It was a form of digital money that was created with the explicit purpose of being a check against all this printing that the Fed was doing, and also as a way of bypassing the banking system entirely. Because again, the guy that's created was a guy named, he used the pen name Satoshi Nakamoto. Nobody actually knows who he is. It's kind of, that's the allure. But what's great about it is if you think about what makes gold and Bitcoin, silver, all this stuff, what really separates that from the dollar, the yen, the IMF trying to do like a one world currency, what separates it from digital, you have people, China's creating their own cryptocurrency. It's not really a cryptocurrency. What makes it different is that this is non-politicized money. This is money beyond the reach of the state. Everything else is controlled by the state. And the state tends to abuse whatever power it gets, right? And so Bitcoin was created specifically for this purpose, as a check guard against these abuses. There's only 21 million Bitcoin that can ever exist. And if that doesn't sound like a lot, well, the good thing is that Bitcoin can be divided down into fractions, right? And so there's you have dollars and cents. Here you have Bitcoin and Satoshis, kind of named after the founder there. And so kind of in the future, if Bitcoin never really takes off, what things would be priced in is not, this is one Bitcoin, but it'd be this is 200 Satoshis or something like that, right? What's also been very interesting about Bitcoin is that certain countries have recognized that this is dangerous to their plans, and so some of them have tried to ban it. And so again, with all the money printing this past year, we've seen the price of Bitcoin skyrocket, which is probably why I've been getting a lot more questions recently about it. When you have low interest rate environment, think about all of the insurance companies, the pension funds, foundational items like that, life insurance companies that depend upon having like a safe asset that they can get returns on. If you're holding U.S. Treasuries, right, the value you get from U.S. Treasuries, the return you get from U.S. Treasuries, far less than it used to be. And so the consequence of that is that you had a lot of pension funds, and a lot of these, they were having to buy a lot more stock and a lot more riskier financial assets to make up for the fact they weren't getting the returns from getting government bonds like they used to, right? And so now you're starting to see insurance companies like MassMutual, other financial advisement. This is, I think, the real change here is that a lot of the big institutional actors are now treating Bitcoin as a hedge on the inflation that the Federal Reserve is telling you is going to come. Now, what is interesting is that some countries have tried to ban it. Morocco has done it recently. Another African country did as well. China tried it a few years ago. Russia did as well. Same way that you have banks are kind of the enforcement mechanism of the dollar or any currency. There's things called exchanges where you can buy cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. All these laws do is kind of shut down those exchanges. It doesn't stop you as an individual from using it with others. And so what's interesting is that when countries have tried to ban cryptocurrency, its use actually skyrockets because people kind of recognize that this is bad, right? What's also interesting is that when you've had countries like Venezuela, which had obviously massive hyperinflation, still does, people eating out of trash cans. When you've had India, which had a major currency crisis not that long ago, Iran, which has had hyperinflation because of a combination of their own bad economic policies and US sanctions. In these countries, they've gone to Bitcoin over gold for operating shops and things like that. Why is it? It's a lot easier to do a digital transfer than it is carrying gold in your pocket, right? It's the whole reason why we got those paper notes in the first place, because gold's heavy, right? Bitcoin's not. It's on your phone. You can do it like that. And so again, there's all sorts of unique dynamics of the modern economy, where again a lot of the historical use of the gold is being used for Bitcoin. And so if anyone's interested more kind of on this topic, I don't want to dive into it too deeply. There's a great book called The Bitcoin Standard, and also Coinbase.com is one of the easiest ways of using it. And one of the things I encourage is that if you're interested in ways of kind of diversifying your savings, and you can do little things like simply, like with Coinbase, you can set like a $5 or $20 purchase a week. So you don't have to worry about the price. Set it, you forget it, and it just kind of slowly accumulates the same way that a savings account used to. So there's all sorts of easy ways of doing it. Another aspect is, again, the goal in the real hard assets like real estate, other things, the goal should be, if we're trying to maintain our savings long term, we have to get serious about de-dollarization. And what's also interesting is that other countries and even some states are recognizing it. Because the problem is the Federal Reserve, in this power that it has at eroding savings and value, one state, Wyoming, has actually allowed their own state governments, or the state government and also local governments, to, like these insurance companies, like these large financial companies, hold Bitcoin rather than cash reserves. And when we're sitting here in the free state of Florida, celebrating the fact that we have a state government that is proudly taking on the feds, this is one of the biggest ways where we can actually hit the federal government right where it hurts, is by solidifying our long-term assets in a way the Federal Reserve, the Feds, VC can't hurt us. I think it's true on the local level, in other ways. And so again, I wanted to explore some of this stuff with you. Again, it is dangerous, not simply in terms of the economic consequences of it. And of course, this is simply looking at the spending side, the fiscal side, without even getting into the labyrinth of regulations that we're going to see, the subsidies to certain organizations. I was talking with someone that supplies restaurants with food. They were talking about how ever since Biden started putting back in all these alternate fuel incentives, the cost of soybean oil, which is very popular for frying, is like gone up 300 times what it used to. Again, costs that are being put onto our small businesses, our restaurants. There's a lot of intervention that's coming. And so what we need to do is find ways that we as individuals can protect ourselves for the future, communities protect ourselves for the future, and our states to protect ourselves from our future, because again, there's a lot of dangerous headwinds out there. And I don't know about you, but I do not have a lot of faith in the Biden administration changing their ways anytime soon.